Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. And ladies and gentlemen, we have breaking news from this Thursday that nobody else in the media has covered. No one whatsoever. I found this so obscure, yet it's amazing that the mainstream media has not taken and developed the whole essence of what's been going on in Boston. This past Thursday in Boston. This is what I found. Listen very closely, because it just fits everything that's happening in the narrative right now, this very day. What is going on? Here it is. From this past Thursday in Boston, the excitement was intense, and the whole city was quickly ablaze in all of its resentment. And at the first opportunity, the determined hostilities that just broke out. They broke out. Yeah. What would normally be an occasion that was supposed to have been a celebration this past week, political figures are found hanging in effigy from city center trees, and from the tops of those figures that which peeped out were heads with horns intended to personify the devil. The authorities did not attempt to remove the effigies, for in all the excited state of the popular mind, it was difficult to say how far the rage of the people might lead. They didn't know what was going to go on. The organizers, with whom the proceedings originated, kept the matter somewhat in hand. And at the evening, they cut the figures down and carried them in procession through the city, a procession that they put on briars. They put them on briars. So all these effigies of these political figures, they put them on briars, and the crowd was carrying them. I'm surprised that it wasn't heard all over the nation and what was happening there. The multitude moved in perfect order, and their route was lined with people. So all the streets were lined with people. They passed through the historic old state area, the old state house, and under what was the old council chambers, where the key city politicians happened to be gathered. And they were yelling out, liberty, property, and no new taxes were shouted in the ears of those listening dignitaries. The organizers were preceded by some 4,000 or 5,000 business and tradesmen, decently dressed, and the whole body marched to State Street, where then they demolished a structure, ladies and gentlemen, demolished a structure which they believed the federal government was building as an office for new tyranny being pushed by despotic leaders. Then they proceeded to Fort Hill, which is the Roxbury area, where key government officials resided. And with those fragments that they took of that frame, they brought them with them. They built a bonfire, which the effigies were then burned. Old Boston had rarely witnessed such a commotion, but the popular wrath did not end here. At nightfall, remembering the agencies of a certain senator in subverting their liberties, a mob collected again at a late hour. They burnt the records of the office and ravaged the house of the comptroller of the customs and of the senator, whose plates, books, and valuable collections of manuscripts they threw into the streets, barely giving the owner time to escape and utterly destroying the interior of perhaps one of the finest private residences in the area. These outbreaks of lawlessness and lawless violence, though manifested the spirit of opposition to the late acts of the governing political parties, were viewed with horror by most of the popular leaders. Isn't that what's going on right this very minute all over the country? And these things that are happening are viewed with horror, and by none more, ladies and gentlemen, than Samuel Adams. So yes, welcome back to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they did. They got it right. You know what was happening? What was happening? And is happening. So first off, what I wanted to bring to you today is that Violent actions are nothing new under the sun. Not in the least bit are they new under the sun. And emotionalisms rise very, very differently and for a lot of different reasons. And it all depends who's leading them. The actions that I just talked about on this past Thursday were in fact what happened as a response to the Stamp Act. Stamp Act. When was that Stamp Act? Okay, let me pull that up for you real quick. Stamp Act. Let's see, what was that year? 1765. 1765, if you remember that. This whole occasion actually happened around August 26, 1765. And the Patriots went out and they rioted. And they rioted for good reasons, because what you had was a subversive parliament that was taking and imposing on them egregious measures to take and finance the insanities of bad financial practices and that of late wars of Mother England, to the extent that the political figures were burned in effigy. Nothing new, ladies and gentlemen, that happens. But these were patriots that were standing up for liberty, not despotic anarchist and socialist, communist, subversives that are trying to destroy our constitutional republic. Oh, wait a minute, Tom. Isn't that what the Patriots were doing with England? Isn't that what they did? Weren't they the subversives? Weren't they the ones that were attacking an established constitutional government? Once again, I have to remind you of your history, and that being that it was under charter that the people in the colonies had the right to self-governance and self-determination. And it was only when Parliament wanted to exclude out of them, pull out of them, that which fundamentally they had no right to destroy livelihoods, to destroy the economy, to steal the money, to imprison them by enslaving them through all of these nefarious acts, to again grab all of that money out of the colonies for the satisfaction of business people and others of the crown. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that was way too much for true people of liberty. So therefore, as Samuel Adams then goes on to say, that, or what was written about him, because this whole excerpt comes out of the life and public service of Samuel Adams. And what we have happening then is that this was a period of peaceful remonstrance that Sam Adams did not terminate in his own mind and effort yet in 1765. It was the policy of the colonies to avow their sincere loyalty to Great Britain, which they reiterated in every state paper, and acts of insubordination were only calculated to mar the harmony of these plans that were coming out of Parliament. Petitions and dutiful representations were to be the basis of the operations for 10 years to come, though a few looked beyond these measures to an eventual appeal to heaven. And in this, it was a component where, very interestingly, that in respect to these outbreaks of violence through these the manifesting spirits of the late Parliament, what we find is that Sam Adams stood strong against it. In fact, one of the things that he wrote, and a comment that was also here in this, is that in the present instance, Sam Adams agreed with his friend Jonathan Mayhew that he would rather lose his hand than encourage such outrages as these riots. And he personally aided the civil powers, the civil authority at that time, in preventing those outbreaks. So all of these wacko, and I will call them that, modern writers who say that Sam Adams was that rabble rouser. He was just a drunkard. He was just all of this, and show him as a young man. Sam Adams wasn't that young man in 1765 as some people in the movie portrayed him to be. You got to remember, when was he born? 1722. This guy's like, what, 43 years old if you do the math? You think he's running around like a drunkard? I don't think so. You think he was a rabble rouser? Yeah, he helped form the Sons of Liberty. And if you understand what was really written, is that the Sons of Liberty put together a decent march. They were the organizers. Yes, they hung the effigies, and they did not allow the destruction that was there. Did they take and go along and they were saying liberty, property, and no stamps? That's no new taxes. Okay? So they shouted all of that out. And they went forth, and it was 40 or 50 tradesmen that went ahead of them because, Boston wasn't that big to start off with at the time. But they all marched, and they did it peacefully. There was only a few that went out and destroyed a building and then took and brought that so that they would burn those effigies. But the fact of the matter was, yeah, there was some personal property destruction, but the real, and they didn't do the personal property destruction. They did take and tear down part of a building to burn the effigies, but Sam Adams always called for order. There were more instances when you read and truly study Sam Adams to understand that no different than what I would call our constitutional members of society today, those who may be termed in the conservative bloc, those who are termed in the right-wing bloc, those who are even truly conservative Republicans, and in that case I may call them Republicans, but those, including Donald Trump as a populist nationalist, is like Sam Adams. He's calling for that peace. He's calling for that unity, and he's calling to drain the swamp, which I represent inside America today is, I don't represent, they represent what Parliament and what was happening from that whole perspective of England and subversion and tyranny and despotism, according to what our founders had in charters of free governance. So what we have, ladies and gentlemen, as we get ready to close out this segment, is what we're looking at is that what the Democrats are doing is truly the anarchy that followed that evening, the anarchy that consumed the destruction of personal property, the anarchy that takes and causes problems, which we need the likes of Samuel Adams, which we need the likes of a Donald Trump, which we need the likes of a Jim Jordan, which we need the likes of Mark Meadows, and many others to call on we who are the true patriots to take and stand against the evils of the day, which are the Democrats, the globalists, all of those who are taking and looking at what does it mean to destroy our republic. They're not doing it for irrational, or they are doing it for irrational reasons. They're doing it for socialism, globalism, hate against God. Whereas what we have with Sam Adams is that he was looking to God. He was with Jonathan Mayhew in understanding what did it mean from that biblical Reformation perspective for true liberty and standing against tyranny. Ladies and gentlemen, is there a time to go out in the streets? Yeah, Sam Adams agreed with that. Absolutely believe that there's a time where we should properly protest. That's our First Amendment managed right. And the government has no place in stopping any of that. But at the same time, there is no place for tyrannical, anarchical behavior. We've seen it in this country before. So I want to bring that breaking news to you as we come back in the next segment, because Samuel Adams will return And yes, those anti-federalists absolutely got it right as we continue to understand history and what it means today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back again to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And wow, you think that people react to emotionalism? Do you think that that's the way that we should be addressing everything and not looking at what is historically a significant aspect of why we should think and act the way we do? And I think for myself, I look at it, and that's a real problem with what's happening right now. One of the things I'm going to step back with, and I'm going to repeat to you in the next segment as well, is that during the period of time that Sam Adams was taking, and in reality, what was going on was that in the congressional record, there's a letter and a whole structure, a whole document that was put together between John Winthrop and Sam Adams were having their statues placed into the Capitol. And it was a long write-up that was actually written up by the U.S. Congress, put into the congressional record, put into the historical aspects of what it is when those statues were being put in place. Adams has talked about in this writing with the idea of something that was going on around the media. So I wanted to read this to you, is that with unerring wisdom, earlier than any other person in his own state, he saw the principles on which the American cause was based and the means by which public opinion should be convinced, combined, and made effective in their support. He saw the power of the newspaper when it was almost unused as a political force. Ladies and gentlemen, Sam Adams, when he was a young man, just out of college, his father gave him an early portion of his inheritance, almost like the prodigal son, except Adams didn't go out and waste it. But it wasn't uncommon in those days for parents to go ahead and advance what they believed would be some of the inheritance to one of or multiples of their children, so that just help them get a little bit of a leg up, if you will, as they started their life outside of college. So that's what happened. So Adams started that newspaper with a couple of friends, and I'm not going to get into the detail of it, but what he did is he continued the conversations, he continued what he started in his master's program as to when is it that we stand up against that political authority if it can no longer be saved. His newspaper failed over a period of time. It didn't last very long, but he wrote many, many, many articles, going forward into a number of the other papers that were there in Boston. But the point is, he was the first. Understand what it was said in the congressional record. He was the first. Excuse me. He was the first to see the power of the newspaper when it was almost unused as a political force. Now, what do we have? We have the mainstream media that are, and that's muckers with an M. We have the mainstream muckers out there that are mucking things up with what? Ideologies that are contrary to everything that Samuel Adams was looking at, everything that he talked about. Let's see, let's go back for a second here. With unerring wisdom, earlier than any other person in his own state, he saw the principles on which the American cause was based and the means by which public opinion could be convinced, combined, and made effective in their support. He was the author of the most important state papers, the instructions of the town of Boston to representatives of the assembly to the agents in England, its answers to the royal governors, wherein the natural rights of men the character privileges of the people and the limits and executive and legislative power were established on the foundations from which they have never been removed until the present. Until the present. See, this was all put in the 1800s, mid 1800s when this was submitted, and his statue went in to the Hall of Statues. Or late 1800s. I take that back. I'll have to, you know what? The references are there. You could go look up the references as to when this happened. But the point is that what we have with the media today is destruction. It is not looking at what are those core principles, okay? And that becomes the real issue, is that the core principles have been perverted to the extent that what Sam Adams stood for as the father in the American Revolution, as I said, it was starting the brush fires in the minds of people. And when you have perverted information that is in the mainstream media that is about socialism, globalism, and the destruction of our republic, boy, oh boy, so different than what Sam Adams was talked about. He was among the earliest of American advocates, I think in nearly every case, the earliest of doctrines which, when he first uttered them, were initially deemed paradoxes or utopian dreams, but today are the accepted maxims of constitutional liberty. Among these, he maintained the right to life, liberty, and property are essential and inalienable rights of human nature. The Magna Carta is irreplaceable in Parliament, but in citing these, the support and the view he pronounced by the Church and that of the Reformation and the estates on what was happening in the realms, to make statutes and observe them contrary to, and what was happening, what Parliament was doing, contrary to what Magna Carta was actually establishing. So when we look at what the mainstream media should be promoting and utilizing their power of the press, of the free, guaranteed press, wouldn't you think it would be interesting if we utilized the same principles and thoughts, that maxims that came from Sam Adams about constitutional liberty, and that he maintained the right to life, and that was from conception to death. Conception to death is the right to life, okay? Liberty, and liberty as it's defined, not the freedom to just do whatever you want to do, but liberty as it was built into that moral and virtuous framework established within the context of biblical Reformation truth, and property, and inalienable rights of a human nature. And the only way we understand that is you go back to the whole perspective of it, is that which God established. And that's what he was ultimately came back to. Because as I mentioned here, what I really want to talk about, and I think Donald Trump has been doing a fabulous job of finally bringing out, is that we are in a battle against socialism. So what I want to talk to you about in this, what do we got left, Kath? About 6 minutes? So we got 6 minutes in this segment, and then we have the third segment. We're going to continue on this idea of socialism and utopianism. Because as I noted in here, is that these ideas of liberty, these ideas of right to life, these ideas of property, these ideas of what are the inalienable rights of human nature and inhuman nature, the king, all of his kingsmen, all of those in Parliament, these other great supposed thinkers, they put their morals and values somewhere else for their greed. And as I always say, the sinful nature of human nature. That's part of human nature. And as a result, they were talking about Sam Adams and bringing these things forward were paradoxical or utopian. Utopian. What was utopianism? Utopianism, I had to go back and I did a lot of work for you. I've got a lot of notes here for you as well. Is that when we look at utopianism during that period of time, guess what? The folks absolutely understood what that meant all the way down to everybody, including everybody around that time. And what they were looking at was utopianism during that period of time did stem all the way, especially when they did the historical readings. And that's why John Adams wrote to Thomas Jefferson in reading Plato. And he said that he read Plato in all of the original languages. He read it in he read it in the Greek, he read it in Latin, he read it in French, as well as in English. And nowhere could he find that the utopian ideas of Plato made any sense whatsoever for America. So the other two areas that people clearly understood in utopianism during that period of both the 1600s and the 1700s, what came from Thomas More's Utopia, which was a critical writing of the period of time, and like Thomas More, who was ultimately was staying within his framework of Catholicism, he was beheaded by Henry VIII because of his position that he took against Henry VIII and the Catholic Church. The other is, from a utopian historic perspective, is what Francis Bacon wrote on utopianism in his writings about the perspective of his island, of this new republic that he had out there. And it all reverted back to some very interesting perspectives around Plato's Republic, as well as some of these other historical perspectives on who they were and where they were within the context of history. So Sam Adams, John Adams, and all of them, having studied these guys, clearly understood what Bacon wrote, what More wrote, and had a very clear understanding of utopianism, which developed into socialism. We have a number of others that have written about that, and it gets very, very interesting. And we saw the failures of socialism in America when people first landed. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move into the last segment. But we know that Virginia was a disaster because when they landed in Virginia, what did they establish? They established a socialist colony in Jamestown, and people died. Same thing with the Puritans when they landed. We had initially a socialist colony, and they died. So if we take and we just look at the roots of America, Mr. President, we don't have to look outside to what he sent out in a letter this week. We can look just inside of America at the founding of this nation, and we know for sure, and we see everywhere else in the world, in our modern world, which I prefer us to look at our history first, is that socialism kills, period. Socialism kills people without question. Socialized medicine kills people all across the country. Venezuela, yeah, I don't care. You can use all the other modern examples out the kazoo, every which way you want to. The bottom line is communism murders as well as kills because of the way that it functions. Socialism kills, and I don't care whether that was in Hitler's Germany or Mussolini's Italy or in Franco's Spain or. You can take in no matter how many oars that you are supposed to commonly take and stroke with and row with because we're in a common land and everything is in common. Guess what? It kills. Okay? It kills. So think about that as we come back, because utopianism was understood at that day. Sam Adams got it. John Adams got it. So come on back in the third segment, because if you don't get it, you will. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And, you know, I can take you through why over and over and over again. And we know Sam Adams was an anti-federalist, and we know he got it right. That's for sure. Otherwise, why would you call him the father of the American Revolution if he didn't understand it and get it correct? So with that, what I wanted to bring you back to is that some of the quotes that are there, and you have them as your references. Once again, I apologize to you folks that listen and look at this stuff. I give you all these references. I know you just never take the time to go out and look at them and read them. Uh, that's kind of sad in a way, but I respect the fact that everybody lives busy lives, and you're trying to live in the emotionalism of the day, as we talked about in the first segment. And if you didn't hear that first segment, if you just happen to be joining us now, or you want to rehear that first segment, I suggest that you go to samueladamsreturns.net. And that is where you can find the archive for all of the different programs, and where you can see any of the additional blog posts, because I am taking in how I opened the segment and how I opened the program today is going to be its own blog post that will be up here by midweek. And because I want to give you a little bit more detail, historical detail, and historical relevance to what is going on today. And as I always say, from Ecclesiastes 1:9, there's nothing new under the sun. And how do we get through the emotionalism of the moment, and what all the pundits will take and try and bring to us, and what the media is taking and attempting to influence us with, especially as we move through and into this election cycle, many of whom have voted. And I would continue to encourage you, vote red, vote constitutionalist first, conservative second, and I'll say it correctly, Republican third. That should be your order of understanding, and how you vetted those candidates for yourself. Where are they constitutionally, both from the federal constitution and your state constitution? What does it mean to be conservative? And I hope you go on the site and buy my book so you have a better understanding of conservatism and the whole quagmire that is in definition alone. And lastly, that you would look to a political party that would attempt to hold true to those views and principles of constitutionalism, republicanism, not the Republican Party necessarily, but republicanism as Sam Adams talked about it. And then what does that mean and fit into from a conservatism perspective? Now, with all that said, again, go to samueladamsreturns.net, and you can catch the emotionalism that's in the beginning of this program, which is all the junk that you get out there, especially with Jim the Accuser, with CNN and all of their insanities. But let's go here. Okay, Sam Adams, 1768. So this is like 3 years after what we just opened the program with. He's writing to the House of Representatives of Massachusetts, to Denny DeBurr. This was in January 12th, and I'm going to take it in the letter here. He goes, the bow and arrow and the tomahawk, the hunting and the fishing ground are species of property. Okay. As important to the American savage as pearls, rubies, and diamonds are to the Mogul or the Nabob in the East, or the lands, tenements, hereditaments, masugs, gold, and silver of the Europeans. And if property is necessary for the support of the savage life, it is by no means less so in civil society. The utopian schemes, okay, the socialist schemes of leveling, and a community of goods are as visionary and impracticable as those which vest all property in the crown. They are arbitrary, despotic, and in our government, unconstitutional. Now, what property can the colonists be conceived to have if their money may be granted away by others without their consent? 1768. So, all those things that we talked about relative to his congressional statue being placed, all that we understood from 1765 and what we were seeing, and to the fact that they absolutely understood utopianism to be the leveling scheme of things, okay, the leveling scheme. He said, under the loose constitution of England, because they were still subject and trying to manage things with England, that they are arbitrary, despotic, and in the whole context of a constitutional England under the Parliament were unconstitutional. So, even more so today, if we put that into the reference, under our formal federal and even states constitutions that operate both under those Republican principles and the principles of federalism, confederation, they're absolutely unconstitutional. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know. I hope you share this with your friends and family and even those, those that are teetering on their liberal ideas, because the reality of the matter is that the hard leftists you're never going to have a conversation with. They're so ideologically out of reality. These principles are meaningless to them because they're hardcore communists or socialists. They are the picture of utopianism according to Plato. Now, but they're violent, even more violent than what Plato ever imagined any of that to be. So share with your friends, your family that have that bent. Oh, that's bent to the right. They're bent to the left. That bent to the left. Those of you on the radio program, I'm bending my head to the left, so you can go check it out on YouTube and see the archive. Some of my silliness, I take the time to appreciate it there as well. But the point is, it's arbitrary, despotic, and unconstitutional. People have to understand that. But if you want to throw the Constitution out the door, if you don't believe that we are a constitutional republic, then you need to read the book and take the class. You need to go to the seminar, and I can help you get that understanding as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we continue to consider what is it that happens with utopianism and moving through that whole idea of what Sam Adams was talking about relative to all of that, there is something that I wanted to bring out from 1783, again in the Life and Services of Sam Adams, and volume 3. And in here, if they were talking about and what they were writing at that time, what his nephew was writing at the time that this was all put together, he puts this, and he's talking about, again, this was written in the early 1800s about Sam Adams, but bringing it into that historical perspective of time. If the want of railroads, steamboats, and swift mail coaches compelled their resort to horseback riding or walking, the exercise found its reward in a better condition of physical health than now generally exists among both sexes. That's interesting. If the absence until the scenes of the war of exciting news left the community in a somewhat primitive quiet as to the events of the great world, the contented tranquility of the provincial situation prolonged life and fostered a positiveness and stability of character which stood the country in need in the hour of her extreme trial. And so, all talking about the Revolutionary War. And so comparisons might be made favorable to our ancestors in all that related to frugality, simplicity of life, and the honorable thrift, which led to the most exact observances of obligations now so frequently ignored both in public and private station. It may be yet conceded that Samuel Adams entertained no utopian impracticable idea of public morality when inculcating the great truth that the liberties as well as the virtue and physical condition of the people decrease in proportion as they become effeminate and luxurious. Wow. Talk about our culture today and talk about looking at that snapshot. First off, Sam Adams was one that spoke from his Puritan perspective, his Puritan heritage. And as the revolution ended and we started to take and really grow as a country, he saw that because of the great growth, the great economic growth that was happening in America under the new republic, that people were becoming, had more luxury, had more money, started getting into all sorts of frivolity. We were looking at easier ways for everything, easier ways to do this, that, and the other. And what they lost was their morality. They lost their public virtue. They lost what they lost was a lot of what was going on in life from those historic biblical perspectives that Sam Adams always said we needed to have. And to that, when it came to the whole idea of that, he wasn't a utopian. He wasn't what was happening in the 1800s around utopianism. He wasn't a Quaker that were establishing all of these new environments, that were establishing this separation from all the rest of society. No, he was more of a person that gets bad names in especially in the Reformed biblical perspective, is that he was a nationalist. He was a person that looked at everything that is in the context of God. We needed morality. We needed to have the extensibility of the gospel. We needed to have frugality. We needed those types of things in our personal life so that we would be personally disciplined, as well as being able to be self-govern. Because when frivolity and all of these other things happen, we see that people spend a lot of money doing a lot of different things and get out of shape. He used to walk a lot. So with that as well, what we see is that the great truths, that the liberties as well as the virtues and physical condition of the people decrease in proportion as they become effeminate and luxurious. Now, am I slamming on all of the effeminate out there? No, I don't have to. That's already a moral issue that God has made his judgment on, and everybody has to take and ascend to him for their personal rationale within that context. But history proves, whether it be in America, be it in France, be it in any other culture, when men become effeminate, they take and they lose perspective on what it means to lead. When we become overly luxurious, we forget about what it means in taking care of society appropriately, and everybody wants to turn it over to government. So then utopianism isn't just a small block of Quakers and Shakers that are going out there, or to form a separate society. What happens is that people lean towards socialism, neo-communism, utopianism. So that's what we end up with. That's what we have going on. And so Samuel Adams crying against it, no different than Donald Trump saying, you know what? This is what's going on, folks. We got all the socialists out there. He's a guy that had a lot of luxury, but he understands what it means to be self-disciplined, in what it means to be a man, what it means to be a family man, and what it means to have self-discipline for good governance. So you need to figure this out. you need to do a little bit of homework on utopianism, and you need to learn how to be a man. You need to learn how to be a woman according to God's principles and truths, because Sam Adams is going to talk about that some more when he comes back, because yes, they did. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right, and we're looking forward to you coming back and check it out on SamuelAdamsReturns.net.